Welcome to this session on Comics of the New Europe, which is a collection of articles about comics from East Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, former Yugoslavia, Hungary, Romania, and Ukraine. It is much easier, I think, to say New Europe. As I said, we have both editors and one of the participants. So our final presenter is co-editor of the collection, Marta Kulman. Now, Martha and I also go back quite a ways. When I first came to NYU, Martha was one of my first graduate students. She was one of two complet students who were sort of orphans because they were working on Eastern Europe, and I got them, and I'm very happy about that good fortune. Back then, Martha was working on what would become a dissertation on crowds and modernism, which is an excellent work, and was not working on comics. And I want to stress that it's a strange coincidence that Martha then went on to make this incredible career for herself as a comics scholar, and I had absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't think we ever talked about comics when she was here at NYU. It's like a case of parallel evolution. It took me completely by surprise, but I'm absolutely delighted by it. So Martha is a professor of comparative literature in the Department of English and Cultural Studies at Bryant University. And with Dave Ball, she co-edited The Comics of Chris Ware, Drawing as a Way of Thinking, published by the University of Press of Mississippi, and has published articles on Central European authors in various journals, including Modernism and Modernity, The Comparatives, and World Literature Today. She has chapters on graphic novels in the Cambridge Guide to the Graphic Novel, Comics and Abstraction, and Approaches to Teaching the Graphic Novel. She served on the MLA Forum on Comics and Graphic Narratives from 2012 to 2017, and on the Comic Study Society Executive Board from 2017 to 2019. She, like Jose, she also is a practitioner. As Jose mentioned, she drew the cover for this volume, which again, my head is off to her because if I had to draw the cover for anything, it would be a very bad stick figure. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Martha, please take it away.
All right. Thanks very much. So first of all, can you hear me and can you see my slide?
Yes.
Are we good? Terrific. All right. Well, thanks so much. Thank you, Elliot. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be speaking through the Jordan Center through NYU. Also, thanks to Jose and Biz. And I think it's extraordinary that this book came together mostly virtually. Some of the contributors I have not met in person, and we just exchanged drafts, and Jose and I talked at length about what the themes were and all of that. But, you know, this was a transnational production, and I'm really proud of the fact that many of our contributors are from the region. I think that's fantastic. So I'm not going to talk too much about the overall book, except to say, or to orient my chapter within it. And in the introduction, we do talk about some themes that I feel cut across a lot of the chapters. And a few of them are translation, transnationalism, the problem of authenticity. Biz kind of touched on that when you talk about photographs or artifacts, the notion of history and counter-history. And this is what Jose talked about. Also, nostalgia and ostalgie, which is the German case. And what I would emphasize in this particular presentation is more the transnational aspect of Wojciech's work, because he's a filmmaker. He doesn't really come from a tradition of comics. And that means that he's relatively free to break the rules. And he comes up with a very unique style that I really haven't seen elsewhere. All right, did you see that second slide? Are we good? Okay, so this is one of the books that I talk about. It's Sloni v Marienbadu, which is a very sort of in joke, because there's last year in Marienbad, and then this notion of elephants. Loni means like last year, so it's a joke between the French language and Czech and all of that, which is very Машек, because of course he knows all of film history and New Wave and this sort of thing. So Elephants in Marienbad is the first volume of a trilogy in which the plot is very, well, it's kind of Kafka-like. There's a main character named Damien Chobot, or Damien trunk, and he is captured by a mad scientist, and he is disfigured by this mad scientist. And so we follow him, but at the same time, it's called the Monster Cabaret. And so it's as if it were a cabaret show. And I also think Monster Cabaret is probably a reference to Cabaret Voltaire, right? Because the other piece of this is that it's very much in dialogue with the avant-garde. So in this first example, there are sections throughout the book that tell jokes about Kafka. So here is Joseph Lipnik and Hermann Schlechtfreund, which is a great name, meaning Herman, bad friend, and little Josef, who is very obsequious. And Hermann is trying to advise Josef about what he should write. And so he comes and he wants to be published very much. And so Hermann, I'm not sure how well you can read this, but he says, well, how should I begin? And he says, one day or one morning, how should I know? What's his face? Some name, maybe Gregor. One morning, Gregor Samsa awoke and discovered he had been turned into some kind of gigantic insect. See, it writes itself, but that's Kafka. No, it's only the beginning. No one will recognize it. The metamorphosis begins that way. And so this goes on. This is sort of this absurd exchange that happens throughout and kind of punctuates the action. But here's a more typical page. And I think this is also what I mean by the unconventional aesthetics, because it's very collage in format. There's drawing, there are photographs. He draws on the photographs. And what's happening here is Damien is watching a propaganda film about tractors and agriculture and progress and all of this. But there's this part where the narration changes and the narrator is suggesting that we should all get trunkified, so to speak. And here you see this involves a kind of grotesque elongation of the nose, and here a lovely drawing of someone's nose getting pulled off. And this becomes a kind of a metaphor for indoctrination, sort of through this grotesque exaggeration. And this is his predicament. So he undergoes this crazy transformation and then tries to make his way in the world. And I immediately also thought of Jan Švankmajer, as a very famous Czech animation filmmaker. And the film in particular that I thought of was Dimensions of Dialogue from 1982, where you see these two figures, they kind of melt into each other through the clay and they come together. So initially this is a loving relationship, but then towards the end, they actually tear each other apart. So Švankmajer kind of dealing with this also potentially political satire here, and the way these bodies are very flexible and infinitely malleable and kind of monstrous. And again, returning to this transnational theme, it's very much about these connections to the avant-garde, and Машек really leans on that quite a bit. So in the beginning, there's some fuss and craziness, and you see the little baby down here saying, oh, it's cute Dada, right? And there are many, many references to Dada, which is appropriate because it's put together in a collage format. It's not as though the panels are drawn in a rectangle the way you would normally expect. It's much more of a tactile surface. And that recalls, well, not only, say, Czech surrealism and Czech photo collage, but also other examples of Dada like Raoul Hausmann, the art critic. I also like this comparison because here you see you have not only the photographs, but there's drawing on the photographs. And this is what Машек does. He draws and actually changes, using gouache, he changes the expressions and makes the figures into these more fantastical, grotesque kind of figures. So the first trilogy was more sort of a sci-fi mashup between, I don't know, David Lynch and science fiction, and also this critique of ideology, but it's all fictional. And this one is a different project, which came out of a series called České století, Czech Century. And there are 10 volumes. This one is just the 1952 one. And this is about the show trials in the 1950s, which I'm told are also called like monsterproces, as monstrous trials that took place in the 50s. How Gottwald murdered Slansky. This is 10 years later. And the central metaphor here is Slansky. Again, there's this grotesqueness where there's this infinite pliability, and he works with this metaphor. You see these horns sprouting out of his head, and this seems to be a reference to the notion of a scapegoat or a sacrificial lamb or something like this. Because what happens to Slansky is everyone turns against him, and he is forced into a false confession, and then he is executed in a really dramatic and awful way. So Машек works with that idea. And then I also really enjoy the way he uses these tendrils, and this happens throughout the book. They are almost like wires that connect various people. And here they're contemplating how they're going to arrest Slansky, and things are not looking very good for him. Some of these are actual historical figures, and he's painted over them and altered them in various ways. This is Slansky, and this little picture here kind of reminds me again of surrealism. You see there's no face, it's broken open. In Chien Andalou, for instance, you have the hand that has this opening in it, and the ants come out, and it kind of reminded me of that type of scene. Also, this kind of terrifying face that's just a fingerprint. So things are not going well. And here, this is the worst moment for Slansky, where the Soviet advisors have all turned against him. And it's a combination of word and image. So those the trunk-like forms that we had in the Monster Cabaret series now become these beaks or swords that pierce Slansky. And right here, this says traitor, right? So that spells out traitor, Zradce, as they corner him and he has nowhere to go. These end papers also continue that theme, and they're very unsettling because on the one hand, they could be wires, but maybe they're entrails, or maybe they're spaghetti, or I don't know, but this punctuates the narrative. And also, again, kind of brings him closer to working with the texture of the page and a more painterly effect. So another project he did that takes some aspects from the Monster Cabaret and puts them in a different form was Recycle Literature from 2014, which is really playful. And it was also more participatory because first of all, he would cut up little snippets of text and then attach them to old photographs. But it was not only Wojciech Машек himself, he would have these workshops where he would have large tables set out and old magazines and clippings, and people were invited to assemble their own comics, kind of makeshift DIY comics. So here you have this gentleman kind of leaning in, almost as if this is a perfume commercial. He's like, oh, what's that? What is it? And she says, garlic, sort of deflating that moment. I like this one very much. The moose is saying, you can't imagine how stressed I am. off there in the snowy wilderness. And here, a little girl eyeing this dog, and the dog is saying, "Do you understand me even a little bit?" And she says, "What?" So this is just this makeshift, again, sort of comics that are made by people, and again, through this cut technique, and it comes together rather spontaneously. Also, I was thinking what Biz was saying, they funded this through Facebook. This was crowdsourced, a kind of a Kickstarter project. So again, very unusual in the way they put that project together. And the last image I wanted to show, I'm very excited about this because I have this book in Czech, but I have learned that this will be published in English in the fall. Centrala, The Sisters Dietel. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. The production values are very high. And I feel as though the best parts of recycled literature and Monster Cabaret and all these other things really come together in this book, because you have collage and drawing and painting and printmaking. And he uses this detritus of newspapers and magazines and collages it together, and the color is gorgeous. So the story is again kind of about identity and monstrosity. It's about these two sisters and a case of not really knowing who's whom. There's also a detective plot, a noir plot. There's also a mad scientist. So it's sort of his typical tricks, but combined in a new way. And again, this will be the first time that his work will be available in English. So I would really urge people to check it out. And overall, I would say what really intrigues me about his work is this notion of, you know, what is monstrosity, what is normal, what is abnormal, and again, how he deals with that both in a fictional realm and also in a historical realm is really provocative. So that's all I have to say on that. And then we probably do have time to bring some of these things together.
Great, thank you, Martha. I have to say the project, it's fascinating that project on recycled comics was crowdfunded through Facebook, because all I could think of when I saw these is that it's a lot of work to make on paper something that looks a lot like internet memes. Even doing that in an analog.
That's right, you're the king of memes. That's true, that's true. But he's very tactile. I mean, he's very avant-garde, old school, art school. I think that's really his frame of reference.
Yeah, he's making internet memes the way Grandpa used to. Absolutely.